Check your weapons and grab your gear. It's time for more of Mr. Welch's Mad Musings, where today we are talking about the Game Designer Workshop World War III survival game Twilight 2000. Originally printed in 1984 and written by Frank Chadwick, among others, Twilight 2000 is set in the months after a limited nuclear exchange between NATO and the Soviet bloc, where supplies have completely broken down and the players are former military types trying to survive the aftermath. Traditionally, the game was set in Poland right after the militaries had just announced to all the troops still in the field that it was every man for himself. And then it's up to the PCs to figure out what they want to do, since the war had ended in a bloody stalemate that has left hundreds of millions killed. This is one of the earliest survival games printed. It is well known for its sheer lethality across all three editions that GDW printed, at least until TSR sued them out of existence. Just about everything in this game is lethal, and you can die from a single gunshot. The game is famous for killing NPCs with diseases like cholera, and starving to death is always a threat. The game will teach you basic military tactics until you get tired of making new characters. One of the core principles is that you are always critically low on supplies, and that almost always includes medical supplies. Dying from an infection is always a possibility, so remember the first step to surviving a game of Twilight 2000 is don't get shot. While the game is post-apocalypse, this is not Fallout. It's very realistic in dealing with things like radiation. You don't get mutations and superpowers walking into the glow, you get sick and die. Vehicles break down, fuel goes bad, food rots. The game is filled with a ton of crunch, and you have to keep track of every single bullet, gallon of food, and pound of fuel. There's a lot of record keeping in Twilight 2000. Fortunately, they do make player-friendly template sheets for every weapon, magazine, and vehicle in the game. You're going to need a printer because every time you pick up a new gun, you're going to need a new template sheet. Literally a full quarter of the book is a vehicle and weapon templates, so efficient page layout was not a high priority in GDW apparently. So is this game for everybody? Oh hell no. You're going to have a terrible time convincing new players to play a game where gangrene is a serious threat and you get a 10% minimum chance of dying from every single wound. The disease rules are realistic to the point that death by rabies, dysentery, and cholera is just one blown medical check away. If you run out of antibiotics, you're going to start running out of character shortly thereafter. Coupled with that, it's hard to explain the Cold War to people who haven't lived through it, and Twilight 2000 can be a real tough sell. Now, this is a military game, so unless you house rule it, every single player has to be a soldier and a sailor. If you have friends that are former military, fans of history, gun nuts, or just love survival games, you might be able to get them to play, but this is a game set in a very dark world. You are not trying to rebuild, you're just trying to live from day to day. So Twilight 2000 has three different mechanical versions. First edition used a percentile system. That's not too commonly found anymore. The later editions changed it to rolling under a stat or skill on a D10. Second edition became famous for just being insanely difficult because the D10 didn't give enough range to make even easy tasks very possible for low-skilled characters. The 2.2 edition changed the dice mechanics to stat plus skill, allowing for greater range in the numbers, so chances for easier tasks were increased. You tried to roll under a target number, bonuses increased the target range while penalties reduced the target range. Players had hit points based on their stats, but except for 2.2 they weren't very much. 2.2 increased the hit points quite a bit, so you could take quite the beating, but again, every hit had an instant kill chance. There was an option for player characters not to be instantly killed, but take double damage instead, but that rapidly ate through your hit points. Now, character generation changed dramatically from first edition to later editions. First edition was a mess of numbers, and skills were chosen from a skill pool that was modified by your education, but it was still extremely open-ended, but was very vague on the background of your military units. This changed in second edition and later when GW switched to its famous 4-year creation system. You started out as a 17-year-old kid who picked a career. That gave you a set amount of skills, but it also aged you 4 years. You could keep picking career choices, increasing your skills and aging 4 years for each choice. Each choice did have a cumulative 10% chance of causing the war to break out and ending your character generation. This mechanically was horribly broken as the skills given out weren't even closely balanced. A Naval SEAL officer could get a dozen skills a level, where an Air Force mechanic would get not even half that. Then add in the older you got, the more skills you started with a slight reduction in stats that could often be countered by your background choices. So a Marine nearing retirement age was a god on the battlefield, where a 20-year-old Marine in his prime can barely tie his shoes. Second edition Twilight 2000 character generation spawned more than a few jokes because of the 80-year-old combat monsters. Version 2.2 fixed most of the weirdness that the 2.0 character generation was notorious for. Now, when you picked a career, you started off with each career giving you the same number of skill points, with each career after that giving you one less point. So now the diminishing skills being rewarded are balanced by the reduced stats, making retirement age characters less practical. The only bonus you get for serving long terms is the muster out bonus, but the vehicles you can buy with the larger bonuses have their own drawbacks, which make them less practical because of the increased supply requirements. Background of the setting is tied heavily into the Cold War, or the end of it. In the game, Russia and China go at it, while the East and West Germany reunite. Of course, Germany then wants parts of Poland, because it's the secret desire of every German is to own part of Poland. Now, this is set in the late 90s, so Poland is still part of the Soviet bloc, and Russia moves to keep Germany and Poland thoroughly communist. NATO sends in troops, the war turns into a stalemate, and the nukes fly. 250 million dead people later, the U.S. and Russia have abandoned the war entirely, including all the forces currently still in Poland. Now, the game setting hasn't aged well because of just how complete the Soviet collapse is. When it was written, it was a possible future. Now it's alternative history. Looking at the Eastern Bloc nations and their often open hostility towards Russia, a lot of people weren't alive in the Cold War, and they just don't understand how monolithic the Soviet Bloc was. Granted, a lot of their unity was Russia threatening to kill anybody who didn't do what they want. A later edition and published by a 93 game studio changed the background from the Cold War, but that didn't sell well. The game stagnated with the death of GDW and the later death of 93 Game Studio, and with both survival games becoming popular again, there's a bit of an uptick of interest. Now, to be fair, the game does let you start off fully kitted. All of your weapons have a large amount of ammunition, your vehicles are fully armed and fueled, and you have a large surplus of supplies from your starting cache. Then you get to be surprised how quickly all that goes away. Fuel goes bad after so long. Ammunition, especially ammunition for the more exotic weapons, get used up, and you either have to create more or ditch the weapons that you have no use for. Rations get used up faster than you think, and machine parts become more valuable than gold. Eventually, after a firefight, you'll end up stripping the dead for ammo and supplies. A cheerful game, this is not. To the game's credit, it is a solid sandbox for those who like that kind of game. They have, if you have no military structure anymore for the characters to follow. If you want to go raiding, have fun. If you want to rebuild society from the ashes, that's the typical plan of action for a lot of players. Another common theme is getting home to America or wherever the characters are from, though that requires somebody who knows how to use a boat. Planes may be commonly found in the setting, but aviation fuel is one of the most sought-after commodities in the game, and it's really hard to manufacture more, and planes don't run on ethanol that well. In short, the players can do whatever they feel they need to do. The game took a few liberties with history, so like women can serve on the front line, which was not allowed in the military. Granted, this is World War III, so you can take liberties. The Germans, for example, are armed with the G11 caseless ammunition assault rifle, which is more of a submachine gun, and that obviously didn't happen. For the most part, it sticks with history, the part of women serving on the front line, so you can play female characters in roles that they would not normally have handled in history. If you want to run a Twilight 2000 campaign, it's not an expensive game to find. Prices for the older stuff vary greatly, but generally you can get them for just about or over list price. The demand just isn't that high. First edition books require you to convert them to later editions, and you'll need to go online for the instructions how to do that. Two systems aren't even remotely close to each other from first and second. There's a fair number of books out there. The earlier the edition, the more focus it is on the setting for the game. The weapons and vehicle books for the second edition are some of the most thorough source books on early 90s Soviet and NATO technology just outside of Jane's fighting ships. If you're a military historian, the books are worth that alone. If you want to collect the games cheap, just wait. You have to keep on the auctions and the sites that sell them, because a lot of them ask for a lot of money, but the games usually don't sell for very much in auctions. So if you want to wait for the one that somebody's offering for $90, wait on eBay. You can probably get it for $20 or $30. A fair warning, GDW was known for their realistic rules and not their writing skills. The layout on the core books are rather haphazard, and you will be jumping from one page to another to get all the rules you need for a combat. Some of the rules on the data cards aren't clearly defined, so for example, the second number on the vehicle move is the off-road speed. I had to find that out on a website. To their credit, the index is spot on with just a few exceptions. I was able to navigate straight to the rule I needed when I needed to. The character sheets and the data cards also speed things up, but you're going to need to print out a lot of data cards. This isn't a game for long-term campaigns normally. The attrition rate is extremely high. Because of its nature of a survival game, there's a tremendous amount of number crunching. D&D, you don't have to worry about keeping track of arrows because you can always find more. Twilight 2000, there's no guarantee if you fire off that Tau missile, you're going to find another one anytime soon. The game includes rules for mining, civil engineering, and other means to rebuild up society. That's not something many players want to get into. So it's hard to convince your friends to get around the table every Friday night, well, especially Steve, Fridays when he's got the kids, and role play out scavenging for concrete so you can shore up sagging foundations in the town hall you just liberated from a band of slavers. But some people like that challenge. It's a bloody difficult game. It's unforgiving, requires you to change your goals constantly, and it's best to talk your way out of situations and blast it out, and both physical threats to your character and the logistical nightmare of replacing expended resources. But if you enjoy a challenge, this might be the game for you. There's also a lot of variance if you get tired of escaping from post-nuclear Poland, though they're all military in nature. Twilight 2000 just isn't a game that handles civilian life very well, unless you want to be a miner, engineer, or a truck driver, but day-to-day office jobs, not the game. This isn't the game you're looking for. You've got Merc 2000, which is a mercenary variant of the game where the world didn't go nuclear, and instead you've got corporations providing the missions and the money. loses its challenge aspect and focuses mainly on military combat. If you want to expand greatly on the setting, Challenge Magazine was the GDW House magazine that always had at least one Twilight 2000 article, except for the occasional Traveler episode. New weapons, scenarios, vehicles, and crews are always found in the pages of the magazine. You can get copies of that for not much. It's also got a lot of other classic sci-fi games represented, even ones from not from GW, like Cyberpunk, Star Wars, or Shadowrun. So if you're not familiar with Challenge Magazine, it is a fantastic resource. So that's Twilight 2000, an extremely difficult survival game with an extremely steep learning curve. It's not for everybody because it's a number cruncher and a meat grinder. But if you like survival games, it's one of the best ever made, as well as rather realistic combat simulator. How you play the game is left up to you, though it's best played in the original survival mode. Okay, so next week we're going to try out a game that I really liked and they just cut short for reasons that I don't know. We're going to talk about the Dragon Age RPG, the one that's pen and paper, not the one on the computer. After that one, guys, I'll do Shadowrun. I promise. I've just got the Dragon Age one written out. So next week come back and we will look at the game that has an innovative skill system, far more lesbians than you thought you would find in a regular adventure, as well as a solid lesson on why you do not license out games that are still being written by other companies. So until next time, swooping is bad.